Good afternoon and welcome to the MyTech's FutureXDiscover, the virtual workforce. I'm Lauren Cohen and I'm thrilled to be here on behalf of the Chamber. FutureX, a program spun out of our MyTechs and BIMA communities, brings forward-thinking brands and agencies together to share knowledge and expand perspective as they share what's next in digital marketing, media, and customer experience. This past year has made working remotely the norm for many, and thanks to platforms like Microsoft Teams and Slack, we've been able to stay in touch with our colleagues. Though we have these platforms, it can still be difficult to create personal connections. Specifically, the virtual world has changed the way we interview, hire, and onboard new employees. To help guide us through this new way of doing business, our panel will share the ways they are working with talent. Before we jump into the discussion, a couple of notes. The webinar is being recorded and will be shared on the Chamber's YouTube page a week from today. Please be sure to submit your questions throughout the program using the Q&A feature or by emailing questions to chamberprograms@bostonchamber.com. And today's event wouldn't be possible without our sponsors, InMarket, AdTheorent, Effective, and Hybrid Theory. So thank you for supporting this program. Now, I would like to introduce our speakers for today's discussion. First, we have our moderator, Allison Keavy, who's the Director of Talent Management at Wayfair. Allison leads U.S. benefits, immigration and global mobility, and talent relations for U.S. corporate. Allison and her team are focused on driving engagement, productivity, and retention through thoughtful and competitive policies and best practices that enable a world-class employee experience. Next, we have Pallavi Verma, Senior Managing Director, Quality and Risk Lead and Boston Office Lead, North America of Accenture. In this role, Pallavi is responsible for driving quality programs across all businesses and industries in North America, while also monitoring and managing the risk profile of the overall business. In addition, she serves as the Boston Office Managing Director, leading a 1,500 employee office and generating revenue growth for all of Accenture's business offerings. And last but not least, we have Jamie von Wart, Associate Director of Recruiting at Digitas. Jamie has worked in the recruiting field for 15 years and has spent the last 3+ years with Digitas. Jamie recruits for areas such as project and account management, media, strategy, data and analytics, and finance. She sits on the Diversity and Inclusion Council at Digitas and helps spearhead campus outreach. Prior to Digitas, Jamie has worked for the global retail giant, the TJX companies, as well as the global staffing firm Kforce. Thank you to our speakers for joining us today, and I will now hand it over to Allison.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us today. Really excited for the panel discussion. We're going to start off talking a bit about hiring. We know that recruiting, the traditional ways have changed so much in the virtual world, with employees no longer going into the office and interviewing as they used to. So Pallavi, thought we could start with you. Wondering what are some of the changes that Accenture has made to its recruiting process to attract talent since the pandemic began?
Thanks for the question, Allison. It's been really interesting, right? We do a lot of hiring, and in fact, even in the last year, I was looking for the statistics of how many we've hired since last year here in North America. It was 6,600 people over the course of this past year. So definitely had to look and relook at both our recruiting process and our onboarding process. You know, we were fortunate to some extent that we were already a little bit virtual because we are sort of a virtual company, but we really did need to change a couple of things. One was to really increase the human interaction with people and really think about this from a human interaction. So how did we do that? So we changed our process so that instead of a person just applying online, that first application, somebody from HR would call them back and try to do a better job of matching what their skills were, what the jobs were, because in the past, people sort of had to do that self-matching and they didn't always get it right. And so now we have human intervention in that happening. So that was one of the key changes we made. We sort of updated our skills assessment, so skills assessment done online, but again, updated to make it feel like and mimic more of what real life consulting would look like. We sort of amplified our virtual career fairs. We leaned in on something we call our Student Leadership Conference. So we had a 6-month program to identify up and coming leaders, and we had to change that completely virtual, but we sort of kept on going. And so we're making sure that we're doing all these programs virtually, leaned in on virtual hackathons to really identify diverse and tech talent. So we've really increased the volume of some of those things that we're doing. But I'd say fundamentally, it was really just about taking our process, figuring out where we're doing some of the interventions from a recruiting perspective. And then from an interviewing perspective, I just say we did already do some virtual stuff. We've just pivoted to make sure it's all on video. So those were some of the highlights of the changes we've done. And I think it's been quite a journey, but 6,600 is pretty good from a
Incredible
standpoint.
And what about onboarding all of those people? What has changed in the onboarding process?
Right, a lot has changed. So you imagine that things like background checks, I-9 verification, laptop provisioning, all of that stuff needed to go virtual, and that's ultimately what we did. We had just before the pandemic started realized that we were going to have to deal with getting people laptops in all our delivery centers. So we have delivery centers across the world, a couple 100,000 people, that we literally in 3 weeks had to provision hundreds of thousands of laptops and get it out. So we sort of had that honed and sort of translated that back to the recruiting process and just sending and provisioning laptops out, doing the I-9 stuff virtually, and then really focused on the new joiner orientation. So that always happened in person. And so we needed to, we leveraged some, online portal stuff to create Accenture Connect so that new joiners can connect with other new joiners, created a bunch of different online capability to really do that connection. And in some ways, we've gotten some great feedback. The one thing that is different is that we're able to do new joiner orientation across offices, because when it was in person, then you were just limited to the people that you were meeting in your office, and now we're able to do that across offices. And so in some ways, people are getting more exposure as they come into the company in a different way. So we've gotten some feedback on that.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see which of those types of practices do stick, right? As you're seeing kind of the silver linings within the work you're doing.
Yeah, I mean, they are actually reimagining some of that, particularly on the new joiner orientation, because they've gotten such great feedback. So I anticipate that it'll be some combination going forward of virtual and in person. And there's nothing that beats an in-person dialogue and getting to know people. So I don't think that will go away completely, but I think it will be a hybrid going forward.
Super interesting. Jamie, what about at Digitas? Once you have new employees, what are some best practices that you've utilized to ensure that employees feel welcome in the organization?
So, for us, it all starts with the new hire orientation on day one, which is when we welcome new associates into the organization. And since the pandemic, we've hired many associates who don't live in Massachusetts and won't be relocating here post-COVID. And over time, this could lead to them feeling disconnected from their teams because they'll never physically sit with them. So we have these remote associates attend 2 orientations. So one is going to be for the office where their team sits, and then another if they sit in a city where there is a Digitas office, and luckily we have a lot across the country. And that way they have a home base and they have an office that they can go into once we do reopen and attend office parties and other events. It just gives them an opportunity to establish relationships. We've also had to completely revamp new hire training. It's become much more formalized, more process driven versus casual on the job shadowing that we may have done before. It's so important now that we document everything and create procedure manuals so that new associates have information to refer to, because they can't just lean over to their colleague anymore and ask them a question.
Right.
And we've also had to change our expectations. We are more flexible, we're more patient, more understanding, that it's going to take people longer to ramp up and get up to speed. And this means that managers have to stay a lot closer to their direct reports than they may have under normal circumstances. And it's just simple questions, checking in. How are you doing? What do you need more help with? I think we've also, as an organization, become much more higher touch than we've ever been. This means increasing new hire check-ins within HR, whereas before they may have been monthly, now they're weekly or bi-monthly. We've also given new hires the opportunity to pair with a buddy and a mentor in addition to their direct manager. And the buddy is going to be someone on their team they can just go to for simple questions: how to fill out a time card. The mentor is somebody ideally who would sit in another department, somebody at a more senior level that you can bounce ideas off of, vent to if you don't feel comfortable going to your manager. We've also definitely made it more of a priority to have virtual welcome parties, and just spend the time to get to know people personally and go that extra mile.
I like that. Well, and it's interesting because I'm sure a lot of those things were happening in some cases with some departments. And so what a more equitable experience if that's now best practice for every new hire who's coming on.
Exactly.
So that's great to hear. One thing I want to loop back to, I think we hear a lot about technical skills and what it's like to vet for them remotely. Organizations, I think, sometimes can find it challenging to identify skills like communication, motivation, discipline while virtually interviewing. And then also making sure, I think, that employees feel comfortable enough to showcase those skills once they're in the door. Have either of you kind of had success in identifying or enabling those skills?
I will say, luckily being virtual, I don't think has necessarily changed how we as recruiters are identifying the soft skills. For us, at least, the first screening was always done on the phone. It still is. And we still focus on those behavioral questions to identify the right soft skills. But I do think that hiring managers are shifting their behaviors a bit. They're studying body language more, facial expressions, gestures to assess a candidate's ability and confidence and comfort level. And I think, while they're asking the same questions, they are doing so with a bit more empathy to outside distractions, a baby crying, a dog barking. We're trying not to be as judgmental for things like that. I do think that when candidates don't have the opportunity to meet their potential teams in person, they start to feel disconnected from the process. So as recruiters, we have to be much more high touch throughout the entire hiring cycle and certainly over communicate.
Yeah, and I think similarly for us, we always had a bunch of things that were virtual, so that hasn't really changed. It is sort of the interventions or additional touch points of people interacting with them, and then really making sure that the interviews are done via video, not just phone, which obviously makes a difference in being able to tell interaction and the communication skills and the like. So not a tremendous amount of change for us from that perspective.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I want to move us on to talk a bit about retention. Crazy to think we're coming up on, the 1 year mark and have about one year of data on this already. So Jamie, I'm curious, thinking about Digitas, who, for the folks in the audience, was named one of the best places to work by Ad Age in 2019. And I know previously you were on the list in 2015, 2014, 2012, 2011. What do you think it is about Digitas that fosters a community that hires and cultivates good talent? And what are you seeing when it comes to retention during the pandemic and being remote?
I think we've always relied on our culture to attract and retain associates, and we continue to do this virtually. We try and host all the same events virtually that would have taken place in the office. Our office culture relies heavily on our BRGs, our business resource groups, or employee-run clubs, and they're a large part of what makes our culture so special. So they, throughout the week, bring in guest speakers, they host roundtable discussions, they're hosting multicultural and diversity celebrations, and these are all things that they're continuing to do virtually. So at the beginning of each week, we send out a mass email to the agency letting them know what events are taking place throughout the week so that anyone can sign up if they'd like. We also, as part of our hiring process, we do like to give candidates the option to speak with one of these club representatives if they'd like to gain a little bit more insight into our culture. We're continuing to invest in learning and development. This is not something that we've put on hold just because we're not in the office. We're putting a lot of time and resources into classes that are going to help elevate associates to the next level. Classes like managing up, tackling tough talks with clients, virtual presentation skills. One of the things that we've also done is put together a variety of virtual task forces, and these are made up of associates at all levels. And they're tackling issues like, how can we continue to evolve and be better during these challenging times? And while, this is not specifically pandemic related, some of our task force issues are, how do we create a more inclusive work environment? They're developing unconscious bias trainings for the agency. So, now more than ever, we're really trying to foster an environment where associates should not be afraid to speak up and be honest, because that's how we're going to change anything.
That's great. Pallavi, how about at Accenture? How are you supporting employees during the pandemic?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of similar things to Jamie. I think one of the things that we've done is to really look at our culture, and there's the 3 words that we're trying to use for all of our people, which is, do you feel safe? Do you feel seen? And do you feel heard? And really sort of focusing everything that we do around safe, being seen, and being heard. And it is a little bit to the trying to create a more inclusive environment. But specifically related to the pandemic, I would say we really focused on mental health and mental health awareness. We actually trained our entire leadership team on, being a mental health ally. So all of our leaders are now trained on recognizing and providing support. We've increased the number of apps and things that are available from a mental health perspective. So things like Thrive and Calm, and something called Talkspace, which is a virtual therapist that you can text with. So just some new things that we've given out, because we recognize that there are a number of people that are just struggling if they're home by themselves and don't have any place to go, or they're at home and they have 3 kids and they're trying to juggle a bunch of things. So we've seen mental health needs go up significantly. So really amplified the support around that. They increased the number of hours on dependent daycare as well, so that there's some reimbursement for people that want to have in-home care versus sending kids out to daycare. So, from a mental health perspective, those are some of the things we're doing. We're doing a lot around recognition. I think that's the other thing, like, how do you create an environment where people feel appreciated for what they're doing? And we have a program where we go to a handful of leaders and say, who do you want to recognize? We recognize them, send them, people like gifts, right? So we mail them something, and then we say, okay, well, who do you now nominate to be recognized? And so it's been sort of this ongoing thing that really is taking force here in Boston. And then 2 other things I would say. One is we're focused on having all of our leaders who are managing directors in the office. And, if we have like 1 to 10 to 12 employees, and we've just randomly assigned out 10 to 12 employees to each of our managing directors that are not in their immediate sphere. So mix of people, and just saying, hey, how are you doing? Are you doing okay? Do you have the support you need? And really just doing a one-on-one conversation, because nothing replaces sort of that one-on-one conversation. We've gotten great feedback from our employees that say, just really appreciate that somebody is looking out for me. And then finally, we have, and somewhat related to the pandemic, but somewhat not, really leaned in particular in Boston around dealing with all of the racism issues that have come up. And we have several work streams that have, a lot of our people engaged in about how we make our office in Boston be a more inclusive place where everyone has equal opportunity to be successful. And so I could go on for days on that. So I won't.
Great.
But it's definitely an area of focus. And again, it's sort of changing the culture, but also getting everybody involved and engaged as much as possible during the pandemic.
That's great. I'm curious, I know mental health employers, I think across the board have seen employees struggle with that and are trying different efforts. Do you have a sense of how you're going to gauge success or progress there against the offerings that you're giving employees?
I don't know that we have a measurement, quite frankly. I think the way that we're sort of addressing it is through those one-on-one connections. So every MD sort of checking in on their, what we call their pod of 10 or 12, and making sure that everyone, again, is feeling safe, seen, and heard. And I think that, you know, the usage of these apps doesn't necessarily mean that that it's worse or better, right? Because some people may be just using them because they want to meditate or whatever. But I think it's really what I'd call, how I would measure it is around engagement, right? Do we have engaged employees that like working at Accenture in Boston? So we'll address it from that perspective, I think.
Yeah, I think, you know, what we've heard is even just having leaders talk about it and doing what they can to remove the stigma, and acknowledging that, you know, while different, everyone is facing something that has been hard, right, during the pandemic, and making it just having a place for that kind of discussion, I think has been really powerful. Okay, I do want to take a couple. Oh, sorry, Pallavi, were you gonna respond?
No, please go.
Okay. I was gonna, we're getting a couple questions from the audience back to recruitment. So I want to take a few of these. So question from the audience, wondering how has recruitment for your Boston offices changed since you have a larger pool now for forever remote roles? And wondering if you have any tips on rethinking hiring.
I think for Digitas, you know, whereas before we were not necessarily as open to hiring remote workers, it's been great to open up that pool of candidates. We're hiring so many more people who live out of state. So it's, you know, I think for any candidates who are wondering, you know, this role's posted in New York, I don't plan on moving post-COVID, I would just recommend applying, because you never know. I think companies are much more open to it than they were before. And they're, you know, we're having to adjust our culture and our onboarding for remote workers anyway. So I think companies now are getting more used to the process.
Yeah, well, maybe, you know, it's probably a good segue to talk a bit about the future of jobs. And Jamie, well, let's stick with you for a minute. Thinking about the impact on the workforce that we have seen, do you think there's going to be a hybrid workforce, sort of, you know, in office and work from home when in-person interactions become safe?
Absolutely. I don't foresee companies being back in the office at 100% capacity anytime soon. And I think hybrid work schedules will become the norm, and companies are going to have to accept and adapt to that.
Pallavi, how about with you?
Yeah, I think the same thing. I think, you know, we're in the consulting environment, so we kind of follow what our clients are doing. And so to the extent that our clients are in that hybrid mode or continuing to work remotely, it'll enable our workforce to do the same. I think all of our clients see that, you know, you don't need to be in person every single day for you to believe that, you know, your consultants are doing the things that you ask them to do. And so I think the mindset of our clients have changed a lot, and I think that'll put a lot less pressure and reduce the amount of travel overall for our people, which I think will be a good thing. And we'll continue to see what our clients do. But we're excited about the opportunity to not have our people have to travel as much as they have in the past.
Yeah. I'm curious to get your thoughts on the hybrid model in particular. You know, the part in office, part at home will be a very different model than fully remote, right? When everyone's remote, we all have the same real estate. We're all dialing into the call or the video call. When you've got some folks in the office and some that aren't, how do you think that'll change the dynamic that we've had during the pandemic? And are you anticipating any, you know, additional complexity there that your organizations will have to work through?
You know, for me, I would say I don't think it'll change that much, because even before the pandemic, we had meetings where some people dialed in and some people were in person. So from that perspective, I actually don't think it'll change for us that much. I don't know. Jamie,
I agree. No, I agree. I mean, like I've mentioned before, our agency has always had a very flexible work model where we had many associates who have just always worked remote. So it's something that we've just adapted to over time.
Okay. So Accenture recently partnered with the Chamber on a study about the future of work in Boston, specifically looking at how companies are going to staff for skills in emerging technologies like AI, extended reality, and quantum computing. So wondering, with strained budgets due to pandemic-induced economic slowdown, we do see or expect to see employers shifting away from hiring and reskilling. What do you think that this means for organizations?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question. I mean, we all recognize that we'll need to continue to have these amazing technology skills and build skills around quantum and AI and the like. And whether companies choose to invest in their own employees to do the training, I think what the study shows us is that we may need to pivot for a little bit while we kind of go through this economic thing that we're dealing with, and really lean in on two things, right? The ecosystem that exists and ecosystem partners. And I think Boston is a great place, right? And we have a great amount of technology skills that are sitting here. And it's really about, rather than trying to train all your own, to understand that ecosystem and how you can leverage the ecosystem that exists. And then as well, partner with external partners that have the capability, right? So not trying to do it all on your own, and really knowing who those partners are to do it with. So I think it will change a little bit as we go through this, but then ultimately the bottom line is we'll continue to need to grow those skills, whether you grow it on your own or you find an ecosystem partner or you find an external partner. But you know, the technology skills are here to stay, and we'll need to continue to pivot and train our people on it. Yeah, I know we have extensive training on trying to get all of our people upskilled on training and to have that sort of happening over and over again, because we all know technology is changing at a pace that none of us could sort of say, hey, I was a computer science major last year and that means I'm good, because it's changing so fast, right? And so investing in the training capability is really, really important for organizations as well.
Great. So I'd love to ask both of you for one piece of advice that you have for organizations and employees who are struggling to navigate the new virtual workforce. What have you learned?
I would say, I think leadership needs to be as transparent and honest whenever possible, and just make sure to keep disseminating information to your employees so that they continue to feel connected and like they aren't left in the dark. I think leaders need to be more involved and in tune what's going on within their teams. You know, in the past, I think a lot of people managers have prided themselves on not micromanaging. And this is almost a time when, you know, to some extent you have to do that, because you really want to know how much your employees are working, if they're spread too thin, if they're struggling. You can't be as hands-off as you were before.
That's interesting. Are you seeing that on your teams, like a concern that people are working more during the pandemic?
Yes. I mean, I think at the beginning, there was certainly some frustration. One of the things that we did was we implemented a no Microsoft Teams calls on Friday. It's just, you know, your time to step away, and, you know, everyone suffers from Zoom exhaustion, I think. So that's one thing we've done. We've definitely encouraged people to take their PTO, take time off. If you need flexibility, ask for it. You just never know what somebody is going through behind the scenes. So everyone just needs to be as empathetic and as flexible as possible, I think.
Yeah,
we did the same thing, Jamie. So no meeting Fridays, which we did over the summer, and then it came back, and now we're going back to it again because we realize that people are in fact too exhausted, and you know, there's no separation. We've also tried to encourage people to say it's okay to schedule time to go on your Peloton or go for a walk and do those things in the middle of the day, because we all need the break. You know, people are exhausted. So.
Right. I guess one word that we haven't used yet, but burnout, right? It's something we've been talking about for months. And I think, Pallavi, you're right. We don't have those natural breaks in the workday that we did before, where everyone's, you know, traveling home or traveling to the office or getting lunch. And so I think a concern is the flexibility actually creating more churn, right? Because you have people working at different hours. Curious though, like when we think about burnout, how much of that do you think is noise and caused by the pandemic versus something that's more fundamental to working from home? And so how do we think about that related to an eventual recommendation to continue to work from home?
Yeah, it's a great question, right? I think that it is part of the work from home, but it is also related to the pandemic. So it's a little bit of both. The pandemic piece of it is all of if you have kids at home and you're trying to homeschool them and trying to do a bunch of stuff at home, you can't really go out to dinner. So everything is insourced, and so that component of it, I do. Part of the pandemic. The work from home piece, I think we'll need to continue to watch when you go into the hybrid model about how people manage their schedules and encouraging them to take the time and the breaks, right? You can't mandate certain things, but you sort of have to have those one-on-one conversations to be able to say, it's okay to walk away for lunch from 12 to 1 or stop at 5 if you need to, go make dinner. And if you have something left, come back if you want to or not, right? But giving people the space to do it. And I think one of the things that as leaders we're trying to do is do it by example. So to be very visible when we're taking a break or saying, I'm sorry, I can't come on because I have to take my child to the doctor, and making that be an okay thing to do.
I think, working remote, it's all about setting boundaries, and, companies really need to make sure they're fostering an environment where associates feel comfortable setting those boundaries, and, being mindful of not contacting each other off hours, and just being understanding of that.
Okay,
yeah,
great.
We have actually, you reminded me, Jamie, we have something that we put on a lot of our individuals put on their tagline for their mail that says, I may be sending this to you off hours, but I don't expect you to respond off hours. And so our CEO for North America has that on his email, right? And so it's set for everybody else.
Mm-hmm.
And then a lot of us also use delayed send, right? So you may be cranking out email because that works for you, but especially if you're a leader, you don't want to, you send it out to a bunch of people that work for you and all of a sudden they're working over the weekend versus, no, I was just clearing my email over the weekend, but you don't need to respond right away. So
exactly.
Clarity or doing the delay send, one of the two has been helpful to us.
Right. Yeah, I guess it depends how much employees actually, if the CEO emails you on a Saturday, I would think some people would feel pressure to respond before Monday, but perhaps it's just a matter of how clearly those expectations are being set.
Yeah. And then people regularly say, like, don't respond over the week, if it's not urgent, like, please do not look at this, or the delay email obviously works. So.
Right. Okay. Well, I'm going to jump to another audience question. So the question is, what's replacing the perks that companies used to use to attract talent? Is it flexibility and other benefits?
For us, I do think, yes, flexibility is certainly one, but, that's something that we always try to offer associates prior to the pandemic. I think some of the other things that we are trying to do right now is, Pallavi mentioned it before, the recognition piece, spending more time recognizing the talent you have. Maybe it's with virtual award ceremonies, but it's definitely so important to celebrate the wins, big and small.
Yep.
Yeah, I would say that, we're leaning in on things like virtual dinners, whereas we used to go out to dinner with each other, right? So we have these virtual dinners that have a leader and whoever wants to sign up. We're supporting local restaurants as a result, but we have that sort of every week or every other week, somebody kind of does that as a way to sort of engage people and do some of the things that we were doing before. So, but other than that, I don't know that our perks have changed much. Or I would say for consulting, it's that the opportunity potentially to not be on the road all of the time could be a perk. It depends on how you think about it. Some people love to travel. So
yeah, when I think about particularly trying to retain women, right? I think one of the challenges for many consulting firms has been retaining women who have young children, and then the travel becomes much tougher. And so it'll be interesting to see how much do those things converge in the future of making the job actually more attractive to certain employees.
Yeah, no, I hope so. I mean, we had already instituted before the pandemic that new parents that came back would not be required to travel in the first year, just as a way to get people back. And that I think was helpful a lot. But I do think that, hopefully, a lot of our clients say we don't need to have you here every day, every
Right.
right. And it saves money for everybody. It saves money for our clients too, right? They're not paying for all that travel. And it saves the wear and tear on the individual. So I'm hopeful that that will help as well. It's a great call out.
Great. Okay, another question. I heard you say you are conducting video initial screenings rather than the phone used in the past. Do you make sure you are communicating this to the candidate before you schedule? Some may not have the ability to conduct a video when they would have been available for a 15-minute call. What are your, that's the end of the question.
Maybe, I don't know if it was me or you that said that. I'm not sure. I'm not sure that our first initial screening is necessarily video. We're trying to lean in on video, and we do let them know when we're expecting to be on video. And obviously, if there's some mitigating circumstance that they can't be on video for some reason, it will work to accommodate the individuals. But we try to, engage. Again, it is about that human interaction, that first call from HR to say, hey, this is the expectation. What are you thinking about? What jobs are you looking at? That kind of stuff. So that's the human interaction I was talking about. I don't know, Jamie.
I mean, our initial screening is always done just over the phone. It's not a video chat, but we definitely set expectations if they are expected to be on a video chat, a video interview.
Great. And Jamie, I think you touched a bit on this earlier, but a question around how have you coached your hiring managers or HR to consider empathy when interviewing via Zoom in the event that you have a candidate in a living situation where, it's not completely quiet, or if they're not alone?
Sure. I mean, I think we really lucked out. We have not had to do much coaching when it comes to that, because our hiring managers and HR associates, they're really taking that into consideration. I think right now, everybody has that extra level of empathy when it comes to knowing that you don't know what's going on behind the scenes, what somebody's dealing with. So, I mean, luckily, we haven't had to do coaching in that area.
Okay.
Yeah, I think we're all used to it by now, right? So it's not just for people that we're interviewing, it's for people we're interacting with. And I try to, if I see children in the background, I try to get them on the video just as a way to make it okay for the individual to say, I have kids and they're running around, and it's okay to just talk to them and engage with them a little bit. So just to make it okay for people.
Yeah, that's great. I'm thinking back to the commercial, that went viral like before the pandemic, where the parent was on a call and the kids came in, and now it's like that's just everyone's normal. So it's fascinating how quickly that has changed.
And I think it gives you some insight too into the candidate. If you're in the middle of an interview and you have a screaming kid in the background, or, it definitely, the way that they handle that and the way that they address it, it gives you insight into how they might deal with a difficult situation at work. So sometimes things like that can actually really help tell more about a candidate.
Yeah, it's a great call. What do you think though, Jamie? Because I feel like that's a double-edged sword. Like there's been talk around video calls actually making, senior people feel a lot more inviting, right? And you get a glimpse into your manager's home or their personal life. But on the other hand, it can also introduce bias, right? Like if you think about the recruiting process and visual cues that it either is or isn't telling you about a candidate. Is that something that, you've had to talk to your teams about?
We had initial discussions about that when we first went remote and first started screening candidates. And, to be honest, there didn't seem to be too much concern from our hiring managers regarding that. at least the things that they voice to us is they're still going to be asking the same behavioral questions. They're still going to be focused on the actual skill set. So I haven't heard anything like that pop in. So hopefully it won't.
Okay. One more hiring question. Jamie, I'm guessing this is for you. Is your hiring process different for senior executives and company leadership roles than other positions? I don't know if the question is specifically about the pandemic or just more broadly.
Sure. I mean, we really try and keep the hiring process consistent across all levels. For some of the levels that we interview for, we do test cases. Typically not actually at the executive level, but I would say for manager, associate director roles, for certain capabilities, we do give test cases where candidates are able to showcase some of their skills for certain areas.
Okay. Another question that came
Yeah,
in.
similar for us. I mean,
Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say that yes, similar for us, the basic steps are basically the same, right? But some questions will be different based on the level and the role.
Okay.
Sorry, Allison.
Well, that's the other part about, I feel like it's harder to read pauses in Zoom as well, but still getting used to that. Okay. Any issues with employees feeling exposed via Zoom in the work from home environment? I guess building on what we talked about for hiring.
I mean, there's been, I don't know exactly what you mean by exposed by Zoom, but there was some chatter about people feeling pressure to go on video versus not being on video. And we sort of have tried to make it okay for people to not have to go on video. So there's no mandate that you have to go on video, and you choose to go on video if you want to go on video. Because there was some concern about whether people felt like they could, that somebody was going to judge them based on their hair, or they have makeup on, or what they were wearing, that kind of stuff, especially in their home environment. So we've tried to address that from a, it's not mandated in any way. You want to come on video, great. If you don't have to.
And we've tried to keep things consistent as if we were in the office. If you're attending a meeting that would have just been over the phone, had you been in the office, we're going to keep that to be over the phone. You do not need to be on a video call, and we keep it off video. And I know that my manager has mandated that Fridays, no video calls. So it's, I think doing little things like that definitely help.
That's great. Okay. Well, I want to encourage anyone listening, one last call to submit any questions you might have. Okay. For our panel, any kind of parting comments or thoughts that we didn't get to that you think could be helpful to the audience?
I would just say, I would close by maybe reiterating just a couple of key things. I think as it relates to the pandemic, when you think about the human interaction, staying focused on figuring out how to make that human interaction come to life, whether it is in the hiring process or the onboarding process or the retention process. And, really thinking about that, the one-on-one interaction, particularly for your employees, is the best thing that you could probably do, because you're not going to necessarily learn a lot about an individual when you're sort of in a group call. So as much as sort of that one-on-one, just check in, even if it's for 10 or 15 minutes, say, hey, how are you doing? Do you need any help? What's going on? You learn a lot in those discussions. At least I know I have. And it's helped me adjust as a leader in terms of how I interact with individuals. So I would just close and ask everybody to do that to the extent that they can.
That's great. And I think particularly with junior team members, right? Because I think one of the things that's hard is the informal learning that used to happen in the office for folks who maybe earlier in their career or, have less experience in a particular job. We talked about slower ramp time, but, of how to infuse them with kind of the same learning through osmosis, replicating some of what I think used to happen more naturally in the office.
One of the things that we've done is to establish coffee dates. So we have each week VPs and SVPs will pick somebody at the associate level and schedule some morning virtual coffee with them. And it's just, it helps give those more junior associates exposure and gives them, you know, a chance to speak to somebody at a more senior level that they're not necessarily going to have day-to-day contact with if they're remote. So I think it's nice to have another person reaching out to them, just, you know, wanting to know, how are you doing? You know, what can I do to help you?
That's great. I love that. Okay.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Allison, Jamie, and Pallavi, for offering your expertise and insight on what the best practices for interviewing, hiring, onboarding, retaining employees are during this virtual time we live in. And also thank you again to our sponsors, InMarket, AdTheorent, Effective, and Hybrid Theory. I would also like to highlight the upcoming virtual programming at the Chamber. On February 25th, we have a Women's Network event featuring Neka Nwasu Faison from Chronicle, and she'll share insight on how leadership and broadcast journalism has adjusted to these virtual times. You can register for this program and more by visiting bostonchamber.com. And thank you all for joining us. Now we're signing off.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.